Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Awkward Silences. Today we're here with Helen Devine, who is a UX research manager at The Economist. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have you here today and to talk about upskilling product folks to do great research, a subject near and dear to our hearts.
Oh, great. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, and we got JH here too.
Yeah, it's funny that the timing of this recording is with somebody from The Economist is right after all the the bank run stuff. It feels like we should be talking about that.
Can we just talk about Silicon Valley Bank instead?
Yeah. What's the user research of that? But no, I think the topic we have is a very important one and like evergreen. People are always talking about this and very important. So excited to get into it.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, this is a topic that we're thinking about a lot, user interviews. There are, it turns out, a lot more product people, or as we call them, powder people who do research, doing research than researchers. And so this is a fact that doesn't seem to be going away, nor is it a bad thing, but it creates some challenges and opportunities. So why are you interested in this? I know why we are, but why is this a topic that's important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same really, in that it's really pertinent where I work because there's 3 of us user researchers and over 50 people in product. And so there's loads of opportunities because people are really interested in it, really want to do research. There's loads of demand. And I also think for most product folks, it's such a core part of their skill set and development is being user-centered. So there's loads of opportunities. There are a few cons sometimes as a researcher as well. So I think it just feels like the industry's kind of grappling with it a bit, doesn't it? And that whole like democratization by researchers or of research, or you're like, what does it look like to enable and empower people while also really still highlighting that research is a skill and a discipline in its own right?
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of tension there of if you kind of help people improve at it, you're maybe devaluing the craft and the skill. But if you help people improve, there's utility because they probably are going to talk to users in the course of their work, and so now they're doing it in a better way. So it's an interesting kind of push and pull there. When we talk about these product roles, who are you kind of referring to? So you mentioned a lot of them in your organization. Is that just product managers, product designers, or who's in that umbrella?
Yeah, so it's product designers in the main. So they're the ones, I guess, probably that do the most research that I work with. And there's about sort of 17 of them or so here at The Economist, but also product managers. And then, I'm trying to involve more and more people. So, I want everyone to get involved, and research is a team sport and all that things. But it's probably the product designers and the product managers are the ones who've most been involved in this so far with me.
Okay.
How many researchers did you say that you had? You said you were about 50, I think, product managers and product designers. So I'm just getting that ratio in my head.
Yeah, so there's about 50 of and it's not a them and us. I've just said it like that, but it's not. There's 3 of us. So I sort of manage the team, and then I've got 2 user researchers that work with me. I've been at The Economist for just over a year, and I've kind of set this up from scratch, really. So we didn't really have UX research as a discipline before that. I think there were like contractors or freelancers, that came in and helped out, and there were product people doing their own research. But I've come in and sort of set up more processes and lots of templates and doing lots of training and coaching. It's really stepped up. But the people who are sort of professional user researchers are still relatively limited in our number.
Mm-hmm. And as these people, these product folks, these powders, people who do research, want to do research, I'm sure they're very well-intentioned. They want to be informed by the users and user-centric. And they're, smart people. They obviously are very talented in their own areas. Where are some of the gaps that you see most commonly for product people when they do research? Are there like consistent themes that you see?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because often what they ask for is, like understanding methods, qual and quant methods, and knowing which method to use when, and, some of those things, which are fine. And, I have done quite a bit with them there. But to be fair, actually, the product folks that I work with here are great. They're really nice, and we work really nicely together. And they're really open to when I'm suggesting things that maybe they should want, because I think there's a lot around just that marking your own homework kind of neutrality bit that's so difficult when, as a product designer, you spent a long time building a journey or like a prototype or whatever, and then you've got to let users critique it. So I think there's quite a skill there, isn't there, of opening your mind up to it and making sure that you really feel like it's all positive and it's just going to help it get better. And the people here are really good at that. But I think, there's some of that more nuanced, maybe mindset and approach, actually, that is the bit that I'm trying to push a bit more. I feel like when it comes to the methods and the basics, you can probably read about that a little bit. And then as you choose your approach, then we can work together, to make sure that you feel able to do it. And we've got tools and things. But there's a bit of that. And then there's also been some things that I've been teaching people about is like observing and note taking and, some of that which people think is straightforward. But I did find that when I came in and started sort of making a Miro board for people to take notes, you'd go back and look on it after a moderated interview and it'd just be overwhelming because there's just so much on there. And so, I did like a workshop, which was brilliant, actually, where we just sort of said, let's focus on the questions, focus on the objectives. We can have a car park for that extra stuff. But, like one of my colleagues actually has done a really good job of that, of just showing the funnel. And, if you have your requirements that are great, then that'll feed into a really great plan. And then that'll make your note taking really easy. And then you'll have your analysis and then your playback's really easy, that kind of thing. And I think it's helping people think about it all the way through and just helping them make their own lives easy, actually. So some of that stuff, maybe people weren't so aware of, as it, if they approach it a bit differently, it'll actually make their whole doing of the research and finding out what the research is telling them a little bit easier.
When you work with product designers, are they kind of running research through that full funnel from start to finish, or are they kind of jump in and out and have some enablement here and there from your team, or how does that typically work?
We're kind of quite flexible and nimble, and we'll work in different ways depending on what it is and who's got resource and how quickly we need to turn it around. So sometimes, product designers will do the whole thing, and sometimes we'll work on it together. Generally, they'll have input. So we have office hours, like we call it a research surgery over here, but it's office hours, where people can come in. And I have said that I would prefer that everyone brings everything to it, and we're never going to block things, but it just helps us, make sure we've got visibility of things. And, if there's going to be a bit of duplication across squads, then we can work with that. So we always have an opportunity to talk through approach and timings and, what the sample is and all that kind of thing. But people are doing the full. And so that's nice because it's quite rewarding, isn't it, when you get to see it all the way through.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. You mentioned, not going to block things. And you also mentioned like workshops. So I'm curious of I think we've heard from other people of how they maybe do some of this enablement and training for folks. There's you do it up front, education and enablement and resources and stuff internally, and then people can draw on it as needed. You can kind of co-pilot a study with them and be there as a buddy and help them. You can do more of like an oversight model where it's like, no, we need to see everything comes through and we're going to, approve it before you move forward. How would you say that maybe you're dividing your time across some of those different options or other categories that I might be missing entirely?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm just trying to think. I guess because we've got the office hours, so that's kind of an hour a week where there's always time to talk things through. So I suppose that's where I'm double checking if there's anything that we feel like we've already got the answer to, or it doesn't make any sense, or it's duplicating, or we should do later. And then also an opportunity to say, let's amend the approach a little bit. Me and the two research, so we're sort of trialing different models internally, actually. So one of the researchers has been working across different things, but next quarter, he's just going to focus on one product. That's quite a big focus internally. The other researcher, we're trialing having her embedded in one of the squads, so in the apps squad here, because I really want actually us to be able to spot opportunities more and, see where research can add things. And without being embedded to a certain extent, it's really difficult. So she's doing that. And then I'm kind of sort of taking a bit of a holistic view, and then also working on some of the big things that cover lots of areas of the organisation. So time-wise, I mean, I do let the product designers get on with it if they want to. So there's probably not all that much time having oversight. I think it's more jumping in at the points where it helps. So but because the other two researchers probably work alongside people a little bit more than I do, because I've sort of we've all set it up that way, so it works quite nicely. I hope that answers the question.
No, and maybe a kind of follow on or an adjacent question is how do you manage to do this kind of support and enablement and upskilling alongside doing research yourself? Because I think something we've heard from other researchers is I'm here to do research and I have a skill and I want to be like hands-on doing research. And now I'm spending a ton of my time supporting like non-researchers. Have you been able to find a balance there that lets you still kind of, do your thing when it comes to research and still lead?
Yeah, that is a difficult one actually, because also I feel like, in all honesty, you don't always get all the credit. Like, when you're coming along to your appraisal or anything like that with your manager, when you do spend a lot of time coaching, I feel like you've got to push that quite a lot, because obviously people don't necessarily see that. Because, I want other people to get the glory. I don't want to have to shout about it. It's only when, you've got to fill in your form at the end of the year that you have to shout about it. So, I mean, I feel like it's a balance. So there's certain points where one will take up more time than the other. So I think sort of when I was coming in, I probably spent actually more of my time doing the enabling and empowering people, because I was building a lot of the templates and tools and processes and stuff. And so I was trying to collaborate whilst doing that to make sure that it actually met the needs of people internally. Now, because more of those are there, and it is a constant process to keep building that library and, a constant coaching, but that's a little bit less now. Everyone's working in Agile, but they're also working on quarterly roadmaps. So there is a little bit of planning there. So I also let people know when I've got big things on. So then we can just sort of be mindful of each other's time a little bit. But you're absolutely right. Like, I want to do the research. That's my favourite bit. I like managing and I like coaching and all that, but my favourite bit is the research. So it's important to have both. I think also they can sit alongside each other. So quite often I'll bring people into stuff I'm doing. So if I'm running a workshop to gather requirements, or if I'm pulling together a topic guide or doing an analysis and synthesis session, or they can sit in and, watch my interviews, all of that stuff is actually achieves both. So I think that's, showing rather than telling is always a nice thing anyway, isn't it? So I think, that's often the approach that works well for everybody.
Nice.
It sounds like there are a few areas that the product folks need to upskill specifically, you found. And it sounds like, like you were saying, you can Google methods and learn about them. And of course, practice makes perfect. But maybe some common areas are, an awareness of biases, note-taking, and the need to sort of upskill there. And you mentioned that workshops were a helpful way to teach some of this. Are there other tangible skills that folks who are maybe new to research or product designers, product managers should be aware of that might be blind spots or things to kind of try to upskill in proactively before jumping into research?
Yeah. I think, I think the moderated interviews are often one that are a bit more difficult for people, because, as a qualitative researcher, it does take quite a number of years to get comfortable with that. And I also feel like one of the interesting things is when you're sort of talking with people about upskilling them, it makes you reflect yourself as a researcher on actually what some of those softer skills are and some of the bits that are part of it are. So in all honesty, the product people do more of the usability and the unmoderated testing. But they do moderated as well, as and when it's relevant. And I think, one of the things that we've talked quite a lot about is, how you make the conversation feel natural, So they'll often say when they're watching me that I'll feel like we're just going all over the place, but actually we have ticked everything off. So that's nice for them that I am doing that. But also, it's just to make it feel a bit more comfortable and to make sure the participants have the chance to express themselves. And I think, sometimes you need to let participants just talk a bit about something else because it's going to build that rapport, or actually it's demonstrating a point they're trying to make. And I have found that, less experienced people sometimes, just go through the topic guide without that and you just miss some bits. So I think, there's that skill of having what feels like a natural conversation, but also, being in charge of it and making sure you stick to time. I think there's also some of that analysis and synthesis that I've also found that people who are a bit less familiar can just overanalyze things and spend a very long time going through full transcripts and, all the notes. Whereas, me and my researchers that I work with often will sort of analyze as we go a lot of the time and, sort of figure out what the findings are and, build hypotheses as we go. So again, it means you can turn things around very quickly at the end, can't you? And, play back your findings because you're pretty much there by the time you've finished your last interview. So I think there's a bit around, some of those things that people are doing and they're not doing a bad job. They could just probably take it up a level by, thinking about it a bit differently. And I think there's just a bit as well about being in the moment, isn't there? About ideally, I know you've got your topic guide there in your other screen, but just actually trying to be in the moment and sort of listen to the person and observe the person and, empathize with the person and all that sort of stuff rather than being so concerned with what your next question is. A lot of that just comes through confidence, through experience as well, though, doesn't it? So I think there's quite a lot about just making people feel that, as long as they've got the right consents, as long as they're not asking anything, we're not, in our line of work, we're generally not asking people about super sensitive, super confidential stuff. I used to work for a homeless charity and those interviews were totally different. This one is generally about people consuming digital media and listening to podcasts. It's fine. So they don't have to worry too much. It's not that risky. And and we use user testing. So again, if they mess up one interview, it doesn't really matter. It's okay. So I think there's a bit about making people feel comfortable as well that the worst is not going to happen here.
Yeah. And do you find that you're able to teach a lot of that through those workshops, or do you tend to shadow people? I'm thinking of sales folks will use Gong or record videos and do training sessions or role playing. You could just imagine teaching some of this a variety of different ways. So I'm curious, what's worked well for you.
Yeah, so the workshops when we run the workshops, they're generally shorter, 45 minutes, 55 minutes. And they're more to sort of collate, needs and gaps and those kind of things. And then maybe just talk about the basics. So actually getting people into it is a lot more of the shadowing. So it's a bit more often of having somebody observe me or one of the other researchers conducting an interview and then have a conversation afterwards about it. I do sometimes observe others. However, I don't want to put them under loads of pressure, and I do feel it's not that nice sometimes if you don't feel that comfortable knowing there's an observer there. So actually I try not to do that very much and rather let people self-reflect a little bit. And I also think all the product folks here, they're all really good. And I feel very confident with them, to be honest. So I don't feel like I need to helicopter that much.
Yeah, I was curious on that if you think of I'm just going to make an arbitrary scale here, right? Of 1 to 10. And 10 is an amazing, perfect researcher. So research done by, a professional user researcher, probably going to be, 8, 9, 10, depending on the methodology and whatever else, right? Where would you say in your experience, having had a lot of exposure to product people doing research, where are they on that scale typically? Are they starting at a 2? Is it a 5? How, you know what I mean? How capable do they tend to be just kind of out of the gate?
I mean, there's a massive
Sure.
There's a massive difference. So, some of them have never really done it before, so they start off lower. Some have a lot of experience, because I think that's the thing, isn't it, with everyone in product and our kind of roles. People come with all these different backgrounds, so I think that's one of the things actually that's useful when someone starts, is to have a conversation with them and sort of see where their base level is. I think it depends on the method here, though. If you're doing something like maybe a card sort or tree test, or, sort of an unmoderated going through a user journey, I don't think there's all that much difference. There's maybe a bit of difference in the analysis, but it's a bit more, logistics, practical, especially when you're sort of looking at like what point did somebody drop out of the journey, or, how long did this take? Those things that are much more about like the literal UX or even the UI. I feel like, I feel like that whatever the number it would be very similar. I think it's when you're getting into that more generative stuff where you're trying to find out what you don't know, you're exploring the wider context. I think that's where the professional researcher adds a lot, because I think, it's not my fault if I work in product, but my role has a smaller scope, doesn't it? Because I'm there probably to work on one product. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to step back. And it's even like not in your job description in a way to step back, because it's difficult to ask questions or, let the person talk about all kinds of things. So I think that, so then I guess that's where I think the number would diverge a bit more, and that the sort of person who has research in their job title would be higher up the scale. Because again, I think a lot of it's about mindset and approach and, sort of the context you're coming to it with.
Yeah. I was asking because I think I get the sense that, people are afraid that when a non-researcher does research, it's going to be done so poorly that the results are useless, or you're actually making the wrong decisions because you picked up the wrong signal. And I don't have a feel for like how often that worst case happens or is a real risk versus it's okay. It's not as done as well as it could have been done, but like we're moving in the right direction and we learned some things. And maybe that's a better way of trying to get at what I was asking. Like, have you seen the worst case where it's like, oh, this was done so poorly, we shouldn't have done it at all, or we actually made a misstep as a result?
I think I've seen it more when there's a bit too many conclusions jumped to, from doing, because I think as a researcher, you might only start with 5 or 6 interviews, but if you haven't found what you needed, you do some more, and you generally do that and then iterate and do some more. And I think I have seen it where people have just done that sort of first stage and gone, right, we know everything, one person said this, it's done. So I think there is a bit about, potentially, us researchers could actually do better there to educate, because I think we maybe don't always explain our thought processes when we've done one round. We might not explain properly as to why we've made the decision to sort of, yes, we know this, but we don't quite know that yet. Yes, we feel like we've got an answer on this one. We need to explore this one further. We might not always explain that, right? So I think that's what I have seen, is people drawing conclusions too early, or again, sort of reporting back that something is an insight or found, and it is a very low number of people who've said it, like 1 or 2 people have said it. And I think, there's always this risk in research, isn't there, that one person says something that feels quite meaningful, so then, it's a big deal. Whereas I think, and again, I think there's a job for us researchers to do. A lot of the time we'll show one video because that person is articulating themselves really well. And so we show one video, but that represents lots of other things we've heard. But I think maybe if you're not so familiar with it, you'll think, well, that's okay. That one person said it. So, it's reported back. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's all my fault, but it's also maybe not all their fault. There's a balance to be had. But I'd say that's the major one. I don't think that happens quite so much here, probably because we do collaborate a lot. So a lot of the time people will send me stuff to send check. And so I will have a quick look through. So if anything like that looks like it's going to happen, we'll catch it quite early. And also because there are 3 researchers, so it's not loads, but it's not like none. So we sort of have a little bit of an eye on what's happening. So again, hopefully we usually catch things before they get too much like that.
Yeah. Have you found yourself in a situation where you need to help upskill product folks in multiple companies and multiple roles, or is this a new one?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. This is the one where I've done it the most. Where it's sort of been more of like a strategy and a conscious decision that this is the way this is the sort of the model we're going to follow. In my last 2 roles, I did it a little bit, but it was probably a bit more like shadowing, where UX designers or service designers actually would sort of work alongside me. And then, then maybe, if we got into something, then they might say, oh, well, can I take this interview now? Or do you mind if I take this bit of analysis? And so it'd be a bit more, of a sort of a handover type thing, or but it wasn't so much. I haven't done so much of the like actual training and setting up tools and things. So that hasn't been the model quite as much. But I also think this feels like maybe it is evolving a bit more generally as well. So it's maybe like it makes sense. It's become a bit more formalized that you sort of you're making a conscious decision. You've had like a conversation to say this is the way we're going to work, rather than it just ending up being like that because of the way the resourcing or the the headcount and the structures ended up.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that changes the follow-up question, which is, in your time really proactively trying to lead some of this instruction on how to do research better, where have you found the biggest wins, or like, have you tried anything you maybe wouldn't recommend other people try, or where are you getting the best bang for your buck in terms of helping to upskill product folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest win is like me and my team not needing to do quite as much of the usability basic stuff, which is fine, and obviously it's super valuable. It's just not always quite as rewarding as a researcher to do that stuff, because it sometimes feels a bit straightforward. So I think like a big win is that we can do plenty of that, and we do actually end up, testing a lot of stuff, which we probably wouldn't be able to. So I think, there is a big win in terms of overall what we're able to do. And I think the other big win is just that culture of, research being an option at different stages. I think that's really good. One of the things I'd say is less successful is sort of me and the other researchers being involved in all stages. So I'd really like to be invited to more meetings and workshops as, a bit of an advocate for the user and a voice of the user, and somebody who just knows a lot about our user base and can just add something there. But I think because so many people are doing research, they don't necessarily see the value of that. And I think, there's a little bit about, what else was I going to say? There was something else on that one that I was going to say.
No, that's really interesting, because you talked about that a little bit before with, in most organizations, if you have lots of product folks, they probably have a somewhat limited surface area they're focused on. So, the discovery they're going to do is going to be either less specific than it might be that you're doing, or less informed. And so you have that horizontal knowledge of what's going on with the business that you could imagine being very useful in lots of conversations. And I think, how do people know when to pull you in? And to your point, you're one person or 3 people as an entire team. So obviously you can't be brought in to spend all your time in meetings instead of doing research. So I think that's a really interesting one. I bet a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, because there's a lot of as well people say, no, I didn't think you'd have the time to do it. I didn't want to ask you because I know you're really busy. And I'm saying, just ask me, it's fine. Like I can manage my time. I can say no if I can't come, but I'd really like to get the invites. And I do think that's a bit of the fine balance as well, because people are nice and they don't want to, fill your calendar up. However, I have been trying to say, just ask me, please, because I feel like I can add something and it's valuable and it'll be useful. And I think the other bit is, that always happens with this is, again, when more and more people are doing research and more people are doing really good research, it's very, very hard to justify more researchers. And whenever I'm asking for more headcount or, saying, we could really benefit from this, and trying to show actually how much more value there is when one of the researchers is semi-embedded in a squad, or, when we've got someone who can focus on, one product when it's a big priority for the organization. That's it is, that makes it really difficult. And so, I don't know how you get around that one really. That's
it's like you want to put yourself out of a job, but not like literally, right? And so you said there's 3 of you. Do you how do you break up across, what you focus on? Do you have research ops, or are you all, UX researchers?
No, so we all do research ops. So we don't have that. So sort of I'm more holistic. I'll pick up sort of the business priority pieces usually. One of the researchers is focused on apps, and then another one's focused on podcasts and those products around there. We do so I think it always works better if you have 2 of you on something, even if one's leading it and one's involved a bit, because it's always nice to have someone to bounce ideas off, isn't it, when you're doing your analysis and things. So we try and get involved a bit, but that's mostly how it works. That's mostly how it works, but it's really movable. We are still a new team, and there's other people who are new and other changes in ways of working. So I'm not sure we've found the ideal model yet. We're still working that out, I think.
Yeah.
I do like what's come through in a lot of the way you talk about this is just being very collaborative and sort of open and friendly. It feels like there's a real kind of reaching out across the different departments and teams, and kind of building that up, and a mentality of sort of doing it together. I feel like sometimes you can hear, I think from a place of very good intentions, it becomes a little bit more territorial or combative in terms of approvals and this and that. And I do just wonder if that is helping here, because, sometimes if I know I have to go get this thing approved and I'm not sure if it's gonna, but I want to get it done, then maybe you just kind of keep it hidden and then nobody gets to, see it at all. And so is that been a conscious thing that you all have done, or is it sort of just happened because of how you approach things?
It's very conscious, actually, because my background was in market research and sort of customer insight, and that's what I used to work in. And then I moved over to the UX research and user research about 5-6 years ago. And the main draw for me was the sort of collaborative, everything's really transparent and open. That's what I really like about it. So I feel like for me, that's the sort of the number one most important thing to do, actually. And not have massive guardrails around it. And even if, we researchers are maybe, the experts and the ones who've, developed our craft the most, it doesn't mean we own things. I do think that enablement is a bit of a strange word, isn't it? But, that helping the organisation to do the best research, regardless of the individual who might make it happen, is super important. And it's a bit funny, the structure where I am, because we actually report in through the data rather than through product or engineering, which is unusual. I think it's not where I've necessarily sat in a structure elsewhere. I think, again, that's got its pros and cons. The pro is probably that it's neutral, it's impartial. It does mean that we've got that holistic view. It does mean that we are somewhat separate to product, though. And I think, that's not always ideal. And, I've sort of had to do a bit of work to be involved in things. Again, I'm lucky because the product people here are great. So they do invite me to loads of stuff. But I guess I wouldn't I wouldn't be number one on the invite list. And when there's sort of strategy and planning, I wouldn't necessarily be, at the table straight off, which for me, it would be better if I could be.
Yeah. You also mentioned, not having a ton of guardrails and stuff, but are there certain things that are less of an upskill and more of a binary, you all just have to do this from a compliance and best practice perspective of make sure you get this consent form or deal with PII this way? Are there things in that category that you all have also kind of made sure that the non-researchers are doing correctly?
Yeah. And it's a really good point that there is stuff around consent forms, what we do for incentives, how much and how we pay them. There's quite a lot about communications, even though, so how people email potential participants, calendar invites, the wording on those. So I don't specify exactly what the wording is, but I've sort of done templates on a lot of these and say this is what people should use. actually some of these the designers have made themselves and said to me, oh, does this work? And I'm like, yeah, great. So, it's not like they're all written by me, but they are they are approved by me. There's also something that we, if we're recruiting sort of participants from our user base, again, I am a bit more cautious about that one, because I'm aware that, anything we do, we're talking on behalf of our brand, aren't we? So we've got to be careful. So I feel like that's when we're deciding who's going to take, whether the product people are going to do it themselves or whether the research team, if it is with directly with sort of our own users that we've recruited through a pop-up or whatever, we would be more likely to take those ones, just because, again, I feel like there's a little bit more risk there. So we don't always take them, but I suppose that when that would be part of the decision-making process.
Okay, cool. How did you get everyone to be aware of those? Like, so everyone knows, like, oh, incentives, we have to do it this way, or consent form, I have to make sure, like, how do you get that baseline in place?
Yeah, so I've got a Confluence page with all this stuff, which is part of the product design section on Confluence. So it means like the product designers are the ones who do the most, so it means they can't miss it. We've got a Slack channel as well, so I just put stuff on Slack, and I do quite often. I'll say, "Oh, remember this, remember that." On user testing, I didn't before, but I have implemented now that actually no one can launch a test without me or one of the other researchers approving it. That's more actually to keep track of our session units and things like that, because otherwise I just feel like it could go out of control and we'll have no budget left and that kind of thing. So I have put a couple of smaller things like that in as well. But to be honest, stuff might have got missed. Like, I'm not saying it's all perfect. I think the product design team is relatively established as much as, any of our kind of roles are. Like, most people there have been enrolled for a year or more. So again, like I'm relatively comfortable that they all understand this. I think when new people come in, we always meet anyway. And so this makes me think I should probably put together a bit of a checklist actually for new people, because I probably assume that they've found everything and they might not find it quite as easy as all that. So that'll be my to-do after this.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm getting so many ideas from this on content that we can create to help people, including this episode. But I think there's a lot of need for the checklists and the templates and the, of course, some of the training is going to be ongoing and learning by doing, of course, but having some of those just get started kind of guides and where do you need to upskill to get started and these sorts of things, I think are super useful to folks. I know one area you mentioned that it's helpful to do some training is around the analysis part and the note-taking part, data in, data out. I'm curious if you track or have seen any changes in terms of how product designers and people do research are able to find the best insights from the research they're doing and then use them. I know that's a hard thing for people to track everywhere in research, but probably particularly when you're not maybe the one doing the research or the team doing the research. So are you seeing any movement in terms of the research actually being used to make good decisions, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the pace has picked up a bit. So I think that actually might. So I think from what my observations are, there were probably good decisions being made on the back of research, but it was probably not actually being done that efficiently sometimes. So that, people were having to wade through a lot of notes and probably spending a long time on something that, was a relatively small decision to make. So I feel like potentially some of the things we've all done together have made people's jobs a bit easier and made them also feel a bit more confident that they don't have to go troll through absolutely everything, to discover the insights that are in there. So I'd say it's maybe that a little bit more, that we can probably achieve more, feel a bit more confident with it, and then move on to the next thing a bit better. but like you say, it is really quite difficult to look at the actual quality of it, I feel like sometimes, because it would be an interesting exercise to think about how exactly you do measure the quality of that stuff. Because
Seems time consuming. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
because we report into data that, you know, this is the kind of thing that they're always asking about, like, what was the impact of that? What happened? Like, what changed? And the good thing in UX research is that, you know, it does, the point is this is to change something. And generally it does lead to a change on the, you know, a next iteration of a prototype, or it means that we've made a change on this page, or, you know, it is quite good for that in terms of it's a bit more definable. But as far as like, is this, could this have been actually better? Could we have got better insights from this? It's quite difficult to answer, isn't it? But yeah, very interesting to explore.
What are you excited to do next? What's next for you in your quest to upskill product folks?
Yeah, I don't know actually, because I was talking with someone internally, because I was saying it needs to stay on the agenda. You know, like we've done loads in the last year and we need to keep doing it. But yeah, what's next? I mean, I did want to do a bit of a mentoring circle, actually. This was something that I talked about with the team when I first started, and I just haven't had a chance to do it. But I think that would be quite nice, you know, like not necessarily a best practice, but more just like a people who do research, nice safe space to just talk through things and work through things. And like you were saying earlier, you know, like the role play and that kind of thing. Just somewhere to do a bit more of that. And I think as well, ideally that safe space where others can come in who want to do research but haven't had a chance yet, just to maybe be part of that conversation. And I think just, you know, to work through things. So a lot of the time, you know, when you want to work out your hypotheses or think about a question or think about whether research is appropriate in this context, it's good to just have that time to just bounce it around with other people and just get it done, rather than, you know, sitting by yourself or even just having a conversation. So I'm just thinking, yeah, that space to do that. And I think actually in terms of everyone's development, being part of that conversation with others is actually a big part of that. So, you know, if I come and say, oh, you know, this has come up, I can't decide whether it's worth researching, I'm trying to figure out exactly what the problem is, can people help me form the hypotheses? You know, to do that with others is building your research and questioning skills. So yeah, I think something like that is what I would like to do. I also want to get doing a bit more in-person stuff, because I've started doing some customer closeness, you know, so I've got some readers and listeners into the office and done like sessions with colleagues and them, and done some little breakouts, and they're brilliant. I absolutely love them. And people that come say they're really energized by them. So yeah, I want to do a bit more of that as well. So yeah, I've had a lot of product folks come into those, but I'd like to maybe, get a few more people into those ones as well, because yeah, they're really nice.
Yeah, awesome.
This
has been great. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
All right, lovely.
Hey there, it's me, Erin.
And me, JH.
We are the hosts of Awkward Silences, and today we would love to hear from you, our listeners.
So we're running a quick survey to find out what you like about the show, which episodes you like best, which subjects you'd like to hear more about, which stuff you're sick of, and more just about you, the fans that have kept us on the air for the past 4 years.
Filling out the survey is just going to take you a couple of minutes, and despite what we say about surveys almost always sucking, this one's going to be fantastic. So userinterviews.com/awkward survey, and thanks so much for doing that.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Awkward Silences, brought to you by User Interviews.
Theme music by Fragile Gang.